Unit 2. Woo! Unit 2, by the way, is the largest unit on the AP test. It's about 35% of the entire test for well over a third in one unit. So that's pretty big. It's actually broken into three parts, or at least we will do it that way. We'll have the Congress, then we'll have the presidency, and then we'll do the Supreme Court along with the bureaucracy together. So three parts to it, and this is part one, and we're looking here at the legislature, and starting with Congress and the House of Representatives. So today we're going to compare the House and the Senate, and we're looking at Article 1 of the Constitution and just what the requirements are. So this is pretty quick, pretty easy, some things you probably know. If not, good review. All right, so take your card, 2.1, House of Reps, flip it over to the backside. Here we go, let's rock and roll. All right, so House of Reps. You don't have to write the House Reps at the top. Just put the bullet points. Thank you. All right, you have to be 25 years old. That is the minimum, 25 years old. You have to be a citizen for 7 years, a citizen of the United States for 7 years. A 2-year term in the House of Representatives. By the way, I put down here a quote from Article 1, Section 2, which is about the House of Reps, and it says that the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year, there you go, this is a 2-year term, by the people of the several states, and the electors in each state, meaning the voters of each state, shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. Now, let me be clear. I often ask my students, what was the requirement for voting in the Constitution? And invariably, every single student will say, like literally every student will say, white men who could own property. That's not true. The Constitution did not say that. Many states might have said that, but the Constitution doesn't say that. The Constitution is actually quite progressive in this regard. It realized that there would be change in the future, so therefore it left up to the states the requirements for voting. So it just says, the electors of each state shall have the qualifications requisite for the electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. So if you could vote for the House in your state, that legislative branch, usually the House of Representatives, or say in Virginia, the House of Delegates, then you could vote for the House of Representatives. You could vote at the federal level. You could vote for electors for the presidency. All right, so just to be clear. All right, next. They were elected directly by the people. House of Representatives directly by the people. It's talking about this whole idea of who could vote and was it all just white men with property. The truth is that black men could actually vote in several states. By 1790, 6 states, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Vermont, permitted free African Americans to vote. And New Jersey allowed women to who owned property to vote until 1807. So there actually were women in New Jersey who could vote at the founding of the country. And by the way, let me just be clear about something. Look, it would be great if when the country was founded that everybody could vote, women could vote, and it was all very, very democratic. Here's the reality though. This is already crazy radical compared to the rest of the world. There was no one voting anywhere in the world. Great Britain was the most democratic country other than the United States, and 2% of people could vote. Women couldn't vote entirely in Great Britain until the 1920s. In France, until 1945, or right around the end of World War II. In America, there were actually women voting at the early part of the country. Now, they got taken away, and then eventually it comes back. The first place in world history to allow women restricted right to vote was in Wyoming in 1869. That was in America, by the way. Wyoming's in America. So America's way ahead of every other place in the world in terms of just letting anybody vote. White, propertied white, anybody. Even by the 1790s, well over half the population of men could vote. And all the new states that came in after 1790 had no requirement to own property in order to vote. So in most of the original 13 states actually got rid of the property requirement fairly quickly after this, although Virginia, I think wasn't until the 1840s or something. But the point is that America is very in front of the rest of the world because nowhere in the world really could anybody vote except in the United States. So pretty cool that we were kind of ahead of everybody when it comes to those sort of things. Just good. It's very important to keep historical context, because we could look back at our time period and look back and go, man, they were way behind. Yes, but compared to today they were, but compared to everyone else in the world at the time, America was way ahead in terms of the number of people who could vote. All right. This House of Representatives was considered the most responsive to the people. Why? Because, well, one, the people were directly electing them. We'll see in the Senate that's not true. And then also they had a 2-year term, so they had to really keep up with the people and to keep a close eye at home of what people thought, or they could get voted out. The House now has 435 members. That has gone up significantly. If you look, the original Constitution had about 75, and then you can see on the chart to the right how it increased over time. And during the 1860s, it went down, and then it climbed back up again to 435, where it's been since the early 1900s. What's happened is that the number of people per representative has just increased substantially over time. Used to be about 30,000 people per representative, and now it's around 750,000 to 800,000 per representative. Matter of fact, if you look at this, this tells you. Yeah, look at that. I just started quoting stuff, and I was right. Of course, I typed it, so I should be. All right, average size in 1790, 30,000. Today, 750,000. And if we were in class, we would discuss, like, what are the potential problems with this growth. And obviously, the ability of the representative to really know the people very well is definitely gone down. I mean, Brutus I would have a major problem with this, because now you're talking about nearly 750,000 people for one representative. And it used to be 30,000, like a small city. So, I mean, this is pretty significant. All right, exclusive powers. This is important. Bottom part of the card here, we're going to have 3 exclusive powers. So these are powers that only the House of Representatives has. One, they have the sole power of impeachment. The sole power of impeachment. Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5 says the House of Representatives shall choose their Speaker and other officers and shall have the sole power of impeachment. Now, understand, impeachment does not mean that a person gets removed from office. Impeachment is more like charges are brought against you, but the trial will happen in the Senate. So impeachment is like charging you with something, and then the trial happens in the Senate. More on that when we get to the Senate. Another exclusive power of the House is that all revenue or tax bills must start in the House. All revenue, meaning tax bill, so revenue means tax, must start in the House. So anything having to do with taxes. So like the closer to the people, if you're going to raise their taxes, you better make sure it starts there. And then lastly, the House of Representatives will decide the presidency if there's no majority in the Electoral College. And I'm sorry that half of Electoral and College got cut off. I should have fixed that when I was editing. Decide the presidency if no majority in the Electoral College is received by somebody. And by the way, that happened in both 1800 and 1824. That's the only time it's ever happened. All right. But interesting thing about that is that each representative doesn't vote. Actually, each state has one vote in this case. So it's like the delegation decides. So the fact that California has 53 representatives, they actually only get one vote toward the president in a House election. So whoever, of course, the Democrats have the majority in California, so they'd vote for the Democrat, but they have as much power as Wyoming, which has one vote. And that one representative has as much power as the 50 some odd, voters in the House from California. So very interesting little compromise there on how to get rid of how to find the president, decide for the president if an electoral majority is not reached. All right, cool. Exclusive powers. Good. Done with that. House Representative, put it aside. Now we're doing the Senate, 2.2. Going through the Senate, 2.2. There's the Senate chambers. Flip over. All right, here we go. The Senate. Well, remember the Great Compromise, the Senate was going to have equal representation while the House had population based on population. So equal representation. There are 100 members, 2 per state. If we add any more states, of course, there'll be more. You have to be 30, so you have to be older than in the House. You have to be a citizen for 9 years, not 7. So the Senate is supposed to be like a little more cerebral, a little more mature, a little more deliberate. It takes longer. The Senate's supposed to be, a little where the legislation goes from the House and then kind of simmers, slows it down. It's supposed to slow down the legislative process. They have a 6-year term. not a 2-year term, a 6-year term. President has 4. So notice the different staggered elections. They're 1/3 are elected every 2 years. So the first Senate drew lots, and like a third of them were elected 2 years later, and a third of them 4 years later, and then the rest 6 years later, and then they just staggered it from there on. So from then on, so then that's how it's elected. So every 2 years. They are elected by the state legislature in the original Constitution. So the House elected by the people, the Senate by the state legislatures, the president by a body of people selected by the people in each individual state. So notice all these different modes of election. And again, this all goes back to checks and balances. It all goes back to checks and balances and making sure that we don't get so worked up about some issue that we go crazy, elect a bunch of nuts, and then ruin the system. The idea was to protect rights. And the best way to protect rights is to create a system that has a lot of checks in it, and that has to deal with the election process. It has to do with how to get a bill passed and things like that. Later on, there will be the 17th Amendment. 17th Amendment in the early 1900s, and that will change to the people selecting senators. So now senators are elected by the people directly, not by the state legislatures. Really important point to keep in mind, though, is the state legislatures originally chose senators. Exclusive powers. All right. We already did the House. House has a sole right to impeachment, but impeachment trials of the president, judges, that'll be federal judges, by the way, and executive officers, those are the people who work for the president that are in his cabinet, they do the impeachment trial. That trial has to have 67% majority. 67% majority, a 2/3 majority, in order to convict president, a judge, or an executive officer. If they do, they get removed from office. There's no other punishment. All right, now, then if they committed some sort of crime, they could be tried by a local jury somewhere, but not in this case. Only the Senate can only remove them from office. They also have the exclusive right to approve treaties, and they do that by a 2/3 majority. The exclusive right to approve treaties, and that's also by a 2/3 majority. And this is going to cut off. I apologize. The approval of judges and executive officers, which means cabinet members. Okay, approval of judges and executive officers, which we mean cabinet members. I have that actually / cabinet members, and then that's a majority vote. So just a simple majority, 51 to 49, and boom, got it. They are approved. Okay, so approval of judges and executive officers, which are cabinet members, and that's just by a majority vote. All right, awesome. That's the Senate, that's the House, that's the comparison. You're going to have to do a sort on this, like compare it. I would take a whiteboard and just try to write out the different things as best you can. You might even write like representation, year, citizen, term, who elects or something, and then try to write it out for each one, and also do the exclusive powers. That's huge. All right, awesome. Thanks.